Welcome, everyone. This is Kathy Day and her trusty sidekick, Jim Miller. And we are doing the fourth installment of Writers at Work, which is all about submitting your work to literary magazines. So let's go ahead and get started. Here we are, submitting our work to literary magazines. Okay, so as usual, you can share afterwards sites.bsu.edu, all of the takeaway information and resources, the schedule, the video of this will all be available afterwards. Please tweet if you can. You can use our hashtag, you can tag the creative writing program, the English department, or me. And it's just me tonight. There are no special guests. So tonight, like I said, our topic is submitting to literary magazines, and we're going to talk about how to research where to send your work. We're going to talk about how to keep track of where your work is. We're going to talk about what over the transom means. We're going to talk about facing rejection, because everybody gets rejected, and how to interpret different levels of no. And then I'm going to tell a little story about how publishing in literary magazines helped me publish my first book. And then if you stick around at the end, I'll show you what are called slush kills, things that you might do unwittingly in your cover letter that would make an editor say, I'm not even going to bother reading this. Okay, so and also if you have questions, make sure, feel free at any point, you can come on, open up your mic and ask me a question if you want to get my attention, or you can put it in the chat and Jim will try to answer. So I guess the first thing we need to talk about is why do we even do this? Why do we publish short work, especially if, we want to publish books someday, we hope? Well, the reason we want to publish smaller things is we want to start developing our credentials, our reputation, and start being visible. We want to start getting on the radar, I guess you could say, and attracting the attention of literary agents, editors, and other writers that we want to be in conversation with. It is incredibly hard to publish a book if your work has never been vetted. And by vetting, that means if it's never been, like, for example, a literary agent might not be so willing to read your novel if you've never published anything before, if nobody's ever reviewed your work and decided, yes, this work is worth reading. And so that's something that you want to be thinking about. And the reason that I have a horse there is that that the word vetted actually comes from horse racing. Before a horse could race in a race, they had to have a veterinarian check them out and approve them to race. And so that's where the term vetted comes from veterinarians. Also, I think a really good reason to be sending out your work and trying to publish it is that it reminds you that you really are a writer. Yes, actually, the most important thing is that you are actually getting some writing done, but also sending the work out into the world actually also makes it real, which I think is really important. One of the paradigm shifts for me as a writer was, and made me realize that I was the owner of a small business called Being the Writer, Kathy Day, was when I had to get my accountant who did my taxes told me to create a separate business checking account for my vast spoils as a writer. I operated a loss in my business every year, but I got these checks, and my given name is Catherine L. Day, but I publish and I do business as, that's what DBA means. I do business as Kathy Day, and that's not my address anymore, so don't go there. There's another man that lives there. So that is another good reason to submit your work, is that it kind of shifts you into thinking about, like, sort of making this real. So a good question to ask is, when is it time to start submitting your work? And I think it's when you have at least 3 or 4 solid, whether it be stories, essays, or poem packets. So as you might know, is that most people submit poems in small groups of 3 or 4 poems. And so you want to have a couple of packets of poems that are as good or better than the work that's published in that magazine. And you need to know that by having read the magazine. The reason that you want to have 3 or 4 solid pieces to send out is that I made the mistake very early on of taking my first story I wrote in graduate school, and I was so proud of it, and I revised it, and I thought it was good, and I sent it out, And yes, it was pretty good. I started getting some nibbles, but they said, well, it's not quite right for us. Could you send us something else? But by the time I had anything else that was ready to send out, they'd completely forgotten about me. And so that's why I think it's better to have a couple of things ready to go, so that if you get a nibble and they're like, yes, send us more, you've got something to put into the to send them right away before they absolutely forget that you exist. Another good reason, it's time to submit before you're thinking about trying to publish a book. Novelists probably need to have some stuff out there and some publications before they, while they're trying to get an agent. And I also recommend that you wait until something is done and then just add a few more months just to make sure. And the reason is that we feel that euphoria when something feels done, and we get really excited. And because you can submit things so easily now, just right on your computer, it makes you think, well, I'll just send, I feel that elation, I'll send it out. And it may not truly be ready. You might be just mistaking the euphoria of finishing a draft with the euphoria that you might feel when something really is done. And it's hard to tell, but that's why I think it's good to just give yourself a chance to wait. And I'm sure editors would thank you for giving yourself that chance to really make sure it's ready. So the first thing I want to talk about is this idea of researching and bookkeeping, and how to study the aesthetic, your own aesthetic, and the aesthetic of the places where you're sending things, and then how to organize and keep track of everything. So this is one of my favorite writers. His name is Dan Shawn. And this is a very funny quote, and it sounds harsh, but it's true. The writing community is full of lame-o people who want to be published in journals, even though they don't read the magazines that they want to be published in. These people deserve the rejections that they will undoubtedly receive, and no one should feel sorry for them when they cry about how they can't get anyone to accept their stories. Now, the reason that this is a really important thing to remember is that a lot of people don't actually do the research that I'm going to show you how to do. They just start wildly sending to any place without actually looking at it. And the reason that this is so dumb is because it's a waste of your time and it's a waste of the editor's time. The way that publishing works, even though you might feel that the work that you write is undervalued, or maybe people don't like it as much as you would like, but the real issue is that you're not trying to get every magazine that exists in the world to like what you write. You're trying to find the like-minded people out there who run magazines that do publish the things that you do. You're not, so what you want to do is to be selective in how you send your work out there. It's the people who don't take the time to do what I'm going to show you that waste their own time, and they waste the time of editors, and they waste the time of the people who did their research, who are waiting in line behind a bunch of people who didn't do this research. Okay. So one place you can start, although I don't recommend, but you definitely need to know it exists, is New Pages. And this is at New Pages, all one word, .org. And it is basically a list, a clearinghouse of every single literary magazine that they know of that exists. Now, this is in some ways a bad place to start because there's too many choices. And so what you want to do is, before you get to the stage where you're looking stuff up on New Pages, you want to maybe try this. Try the anthology approach, which is, and these are all from this is just a screenshot from the takeaway document, but be thinking about either the genre that you write in, the form that you write in, or the subject matter, the subgenre, the commercial subgenre that you publish in. For example, I used Best American Short Stories when I was young, and I would read that and I would find the stories that really made me go, wow. And then I would look to see who published those stories, and that's kind of where I started in terms of doing my research. You should also know that there's, for fiction, there's Best American Mystery and Suspense, Science Fiction and Fantasy. And for those of you who love science and fiction and fantasy, you know that those two genres are huge in and of themselves. And so there's even drilling down from there, you can find an anthology called like the year's top robot and AI stories. So you want to, best horror, And then in nonfiction, there's Best American Essays, and then even more specific food writing, science and nature writing, travel writing, sports writing. You can do it in terms of, there's links in here to different types of poetry, different regions that people write about. Belt Publishing at the very end of that list there puts out these things called city anthologies about Rust Belt cities, including Indianapolis. So that's a really good way to think about, start narrowing down your options. Another way, and just to show you an example, this is, if you write flash fiction, there's an anthology called Best Small Fictions Anthology. And so you can see that, you know, there's title, author, name of magazine. So if you write flash, you'd be like, well, Split Lip, Flash Flood, Bangalore Review, Flash Fiction Online, Smoke Long Quarterly. I need to start Googling these and checking them out and seeing what they're like. So that's kind of one way to start. Another way is to use an author's bio. Just this weekend, I finished reading the book Quint by one of our in-print authors in March, Dion Irving. And so you look her up and you see that her work has been published in Crab Orchard Review and New Delta Review. And so then you go back to New Pages and you look at Crab Orchard Review and New Delta Review to see what you can find out about those magazines. So pretty much whenever you find yourself responding to and resonating with something that you read, that is a good indication that that's probably something that you might like to write yourself. And so that's kind of how you can take that approach. I also highly recommend the good old library approach, and the fact that you can go over to Bracken Library to current periodicals. I even drew a little arrow there for you. And a lot of the magazines, literary magazines, we subscribe to them at Ball State, and you can actually, if they're print magazines, you can actually read them. And you can also go on to log into your library account. And I did this today and found a story that I published in the Southern Review 20 years ago. And I found it and was able to read anything. Lots of the magazines that we subscribe to at Ball State are also available totally online. So if you don't want to go actually physically hold the magazines, you want to just be able to see them, you can go log in and see them that way. So that's another good way to do it. Another suggestion I have for you is that, let's say that it's the know your commercial genre approach. So let's say that you love to read, like maybe instead of working from the short thing to the big thing, think of it the opposite way. Go from the big thing that you like to read. Maybe there's a particular kind of novel that you love. Many of my students love fantasy, and let's say that you know that Arthurian fantasies are a huge thing with you, very specific. And so then you just go to Arthurian fantasy anthology and Google that and see what you find. And that will tell you, like, here are people who are working in that particular genre and magazines that are publishing that particular kind of story. This is a screenshot from what's called the Book Industry Standards and Communication Codes. These are the codes that publishers use to categorize books commercially. And it's a really good way to kind of identify within a large kind of subgenre what the different specific, there's like, there's like romance. There's like 12, 15 different types of romance. So this is a really good way to start identifying those things. This is a piece of advice from a BSU English alum, John Carter, who's in the MFA program at Iowa State right now. And his advice to you was to follow lit magazines on Twitter and look at who they follow to expand that network. Most of the times that I submit to something, it's because I saw the call for subs on Twitter. And so my students are looking for new magazine or looking for people and organizations to follow on Twitter. So that's a really good suggestion. So your goal here is to end up compiling a list of 20 to 30 magazines where you think your work would be a good fit and has a reasonable chance of being accepted. And you want to make sure that, and if 20 or 30, that seems like a lot, in the end, it won't really. I mean, you could even go as high as 40. Make sure that you have seen, read, or perused at least something from every magazine on that list so that you don't become the lame-o writer that Dan Sean was talking about. And then you want to try to rank them according to most difficult to get into to least difficult. And a lot of magazines will tell you like what their acceptance rate is in terms of a percentage, or they'll tell you how many stories they accept or poems or essays they accept out of how many submissions a year. And that will give you a good indication. If they pay, that's probably makes it very difficult to, or harder to get into than the ones that don't pay. And then you want to start with the most difficult ones and then sort of work your way down. And once you have this list, you are almost ready to send your work out into the world. But first you need to have some kind of system. And this was my amazing system back when I was sending out a lot of stories, was I would tack note cards, I would tack them to the wall and keep track of where my stuff was. And so here is Story Magazine is a magazine that used to come out of Cincinnati, Ohio. And so you can see that I sent them, Leon, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 stories from 1993 to 1998. And they finally took number 10, my 10th submission, Circus House. And that's how I kept track of where my stuff was. You will probably want to do something much more clever than that and create an Excel spreadsheet or a Google Sheet spreadsheet, or a lot of magazines use Submittable now, which is a platform that like you go into Submittable to submit from there to all these different magazines. And so Submittable keeps track of where all your stuff is, or you could pay to subscribe to Duotrope, which can also give you other information like how long it generally takes a magazine to get back to you. Now, the reason that you want to keep track of all these things is because of something called simultaneous submission, which is the act of sending your work to more than one magazine at a time, which if you think of publication as at this stage of things as kind of a numbers game, which it is, you increase your chances of getting something published the more work that you have out there. And so when you do that, like let's say you submit something to 5 magazines and one of them says yes, you absolutely must inform the other 4 magazines as soon as possible, because you do not want an angry editor on your hands. If anybody here today is from Broken Plate, for example, I know that this happens at the Broken Plate, our national literary magazine here at Ball State, all the time. You read something, you love it as a staff, and you send an email to the writer and say, yes, we're so excited to publish name of essay. And then you might actually start copy editing it or laying it out in the issue. And then the person's like, oh, sorry, such and such magazine already took that. I forgot to tell you. And that's just the worst. And some magazines will just refuse to ever look at your work again if you forget like that. A friend of mine, a writer named James Brubaker, said the same thing. He said, keep good records, withdraw right away if accepted elsewhere, and submit to as many suitable, and make sure they're suitable by reading venues as possible. He suggested batches of 20 or so to keep your records manageable. I actually could only manage to do about 5 or 6 at a time, but that was me since I was using note cards on the wall. And he says, so that you can be ready to send something else when the rejection comes in. So
there's a question in the chat, Kathy, about this actually, about from Matt.
Tell me what it says, because I can't see.
Sure. Do these magazines usually have certain contact information to go to so you can let them know ASAP about a different magazine accepting the work?
Yes, they do. And in fact, there's a way to do it. If they use Submittable, there's a way to log into Submittable and communicate with the magazine directly from Submittable, but they also probably have email addresses on their website that will also tell you exactly how to do that. Thank you. That's a very good question. Is there anything else, Jim?
I think maybe Kylie works with Broken Plate and is just noting that, yes, this is a pretty common occurrence, something that happens a lot.
Ugh, it's the worst. It's the worst. Okay, so thank you. Because I'm using my laptop tonight for the presentation, all I can literally see right now is my presentation. That's the only thing that's on my screen. I can't even see you at all, Jim. So let me talk about transoms. In case you ever wondered what a transom was, it's that thing, it's that little window thing above your door. That's what a transom is. And it's another old term from publishing that it means unsolicited manuscript. It means like back when a publisher existed in an office, the editors in the office would solicit manuscripts from writers and would be working with, stuff on their desk. But then the people who were not asked to submit their work come in at night and put their work over the transom, like literally like throw it onto the floor. And so that's what an unsolicited manuscript comes in over the transom. That's where that term comes from. I thought I would show you, this is a friend of mine from graduate school, Mark Drew, worked as the assistant editor at the Gettysburg Review for quite a long time. He's actually currently the editor-in-chief, but at the time I put this together, he was the assistant editor. And the editor's name was Peter Stitt. And Mark's job as the assistant editor was to read everything that came in over the transom and to reject 80% of everything that came in and put the best 20% on Peter's desk. His other job was anything that they solicited from a writer immediately went to Peter's desk, as well as anybody who'd ever been published in the magazine before also went directly to Peter's desk. So this is an example of like what happens when, and this was 20 years ago when I put this together. The magazine was still using actual paper, but the process is the same even when it happens online. So it's November 28th, 2000, and this writer is writing to Peter Stitt and says, "Happy Thanksgiving. While the turkey is cooking and I'm waiting for guests to arrive, I was looking through my semi-reliable files and I discovered it's been about 1.5 years since I sent any poems your way. Enclosed are 5. Here are the names of those 5 poems. My poems have appeared in or are forthcoming in names a lot of journals. This is what you do. An SASE, which stands for self-addressed stamped envelope, is enclosed for your convenience. Before email, we would send our stuff and then we would put a little self-addressed stamped envelope in there, and then they would use that to mail us back our rejection letters. So this is the next stage of things. So if you look at the top, it says date of submission, November 28th. Today's date, it's 5 months later. Mark was the only person who was allowed to read submissions, and that was to make sure that the quality was consistent over the over all issues of the magazine. And so it took, there's only so many words that a human being can read in a day, and so it sometimes took a long time. So it's 5 months later, and he's doing what's called a reader report. So he's putting something that rose to the top for him onto Peter's desk, and his job is to recommend an action. And so there were 3 levels of recommended action. There was consider accept, consider, and consider reject, and then to write some comments. And so he's, take a look at these. I'm puzzled and intrigued by the non sequitur, blah, 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 blah. And then Peter writes, and he has horrible handwriting, as you can see, and he says something like, I like these, they're ease, but probably they are too easy. None quite makes it something. I don't know what it says, but there's a big R. And so that means that Peter ultimately said, no, I don't want to publish this poem. And so here is the form rejection. So this is, if it was just the piece of paper that you got in your envelope, it's just very, and now you would just get like an email with very maybe stiff and formal language that indicates not enthusiasm, but also no hatred as well. Thank you for letting us consider your manuscript. We regret that it does not meet our suit our present needs. And so, but because this actually made it to Peter's desk, Mark writes, sorry to have made you wait so long for this disappointing response. Try us again next season. So this is a very important thing to tell you, is that how you respond to thank you, but no, even after 5 months, has everything to do with your future as a professional writer. Almost everything about writing, being a writer, has to do with your mindset. And this is one of the really important aspects of that. I thought I would show you that even though some of this stuff from Gettysburg Review comes from 20 years ago, these are their submission guidelines that are, I got this off their website last night. One of the reasons it's so hard to get into Gettysburg Review and it takes so long is they actually pay. Payment is upon publication. They pay $2.50 a line for poetry, and $25 per printed page for prose. So you also get the issue containing your work and a 1-year subscription. So on response time, they've written, expect 5 to 8 months for a decision. Since using Submittable as a tool, our submissions have drastically increased. Please be patient and refrain from inquiring about your manuscript status until at least 8 months have passed. If you decide to inquire, we prefer that authors send us a note with an SASE or inquire through the notes function in Submittable rather than contact via phone or email. Please understand that we too would like to provide you with a shorter response time, but volume simply doesn't allow it. Additionally, we cannot respond individually to each submission. One rejection is not necessarily an indicator of a future response. And it's really important to take all that exactly, like to follow the directions that they give you. If they say that you can't contact them for before 8 months, then that's what you have to do. If they say that you need to use the notes function, then that's what you do. And if they say that they cannot respond to every submission, what you're used to is in creative writing classes, when you get a grade on something, you get an explanation for why you got that grade. And that's perhaps one of the hardest things about submitting your work, is that they don't have enough time when they say no to tell you why they said no. They'll say things like, this does not meet our present needs, or this just didn't work for us. And then it becomes your job to figure out, is there a reason that the thing that I'm submitting is continuing to get rejections, or have I just not found the right audience for what I'm doing yet? It's hard. And so that's kind of what I wanted to talk about, levels of no and how to read rejection letters, because sometimes something that may seem like mean is actually not mean at all. So just remember that about 80% of the time, a magazine will send a form rejection letter or email that is just very, like I said, very neutral. We appreciate the opportunity to consider your work. We regret having to return it. Thank you for sending it to us. These are some more of my rejection letters from over the years. As you can see, they're wonderful. And I've accumulated hundreds of those over the years. I still get them. No writer, even after you start publishing books, you never get a free pass. It's just part of how this works. There are also sometimes form rejections that are trying to let you know that they want you to keep sending. Maybe they don't have time to write you a personalized rejection, but if you look down here at the Paris Review, it says, we are unable to accept it for publication, but remain interested in your work and would like to see more of it. And so that is their indication that, hey, we really do want to see more of your work, so you should take them at their word. And like I said, 15 to 20% of the time, the editor's response will indicate in some way that your work made it to the top of the pile. Maybe they had a meeting to discuss whether or not to include it. And once upon a time, we called this getting ink, because the editor would usually handwrite some sort of personalized rejection on the rejection note. And I assume, that's the same thing happens now, just in email. You can tell when it's a form rejection and when it's something that actually is maybe referring more to your story. Or if the email that comes from Gettysburg at gettysburgreview.com or edu is signed by somebody with somebody's name. And remember that if you get a personalized rejection note, that is something that you should celebrate. Yes, it means you came very close, but no cigar, but it also means that your work is rising to the top 15 to 20% of everything that they're receiving. And that is a wonderful sign and something that you should celebrate. This is from a former student of mine, Aubrey Hirsch, and she said, every writer has a bazillion rejections. They aren't a ruling on your talent. They're just part of the game. The people who can hear no a whole bunch and keep going are the people who get to be writers. The ones that give up don't. And that's really good advice. I want to mention this in regard to something that is kind of a buzzword these days about fixed mindsets versus growth mindsets. And something that you may not realize about yourselves as creative writers, for those of you who are here who are creative writing majors or creative writing students of one kind or another, the fact that our discipline is about sitting around and basically offering critique of each other's stuff, and people who cannot handle that kind of feedback can't be creative writing majors. They usually leave, because especially if they believe that if they get told no, that means that they're not a writer. People with a fixed mindset think that you either are a writer or you're not, and that if you're not, you're going to get a rejection, so why continue? People like that tend not to become writers, and also tend not to do very well in creative writing instruction. Whereas it's much better to see it as, if I can get feedback, that makes me better. And so whatever kind of feedback I'm getting is actually a good thing. It's to see that kind of, to see rejection as an opportunity for growth is the thing that you want. And sometimes, to show that your work received special consideration and almost made it, the editor will take the time to write, type, or dictate a rejection letter. Now, honestly, sometimes it's hard to know what to do with this kind of thing. This is more like getting a critique, like you're used to getting critiques from your classmates. This is like getting a critique from an editor who you don't know, who you don't sit in a class with. And sometimes, and they will tell you why it wasn't right for them, but this is where you have to decide whether what they're telling you is helpful or whether it's not. So I'm going to show you a couple examples of this. This is a rejection letter that I received from the Sonora Review a long time ago. And it's about a story called Leon's Daughter, which is about a guy named Leon who is raising his daughter alone. He has no wife, and he realizes that his daughter is pregnant, and he sort of figures out how to help her know what to do about this pregnancy, but they don't talk about it. And that's just kind of the way it is with them. They just don't talk about sex, they don't talk about romance, they don't talk about those kinds of things. And so in this rejection letter, the editor said, I love the voice, blah, blah, blah. What doesn't work well is the quick and somewhat vague treatment of the abortion issue and the end, which seems abrupt. You can push this further, maybe insert a few more scenes between father and daughter that go deeper into their emotions. Now, when you get a rejection letter like this is one of those things, like everybody is familiar with that feeling of being in a workshop and people say things like, I wish that you'd done this, or I wish the story had done this. And sometimes people say those things and it's incredibly helpful. And sometimes they say those things and you're like, absolutely not. Now, the only thing that matters is that sometimes people say things that are helpful, and then you try to do those things. But this was an example of an editor saying, I wanted this to be a different kind of story than it is. And so I did. He even said, if you revise this and send it back to us, we'll look at it again. But I'm like, no, that's not the story that I want to write. So I just realized, I'm like, I need to make it clear. I need to make what I want to say more clear. And so that's what I did. And I sent it somewhere else and it was published. Here's another example from a story that I submitted to a magazine in Minnesota. And he said, it's nicely told, but it's also all exposition. My tastes run toward a bit more happening on stage. And this was about the third or fourth story that I had sent to this editor. And then I realized, okay, he's never going to publish my stories because I'm really into, I was really into telling instead of showing, or telling as a way of showing. And he was really into show, don't tell. And I knew that aesthetically, my aesthetic and his did not match. And I stopped sending him stories, and I quit expecting W. Scott Olson to get me or like me. And I tried to find editors that already appreciated what I was doing. And it's important to remember that no editor just sits there and reads all day. They have meetings and commitments. They read on their own time. They really want to find things that they love. And sometimes they can only accept about 1% of what they get in the mail, or get on Submittable. This means that they must say no to a lot of things that they even really, really like. And it's not personal. That's a really hard thing to accept. I wanted to show you 2 letters that I received within a few days of each other regarding the same story. And I know the handwriting is really bad on the left, but Jenny Dixiana is a splendid story, and I wish I'd written it. I do want to publish it, though I'll want to discuss the ending with you a bit, blah, blah, blah. Send me this story on disc so you can tell how long ago this was. I'm really happy to have this story. I had to read it to a friend I'd been discussing fiction with. All best, Rod Smith. Oh, I love you, Rod Smith. But the same story that I sent to C. Michael Curtis at the Atlantic, he wrote, this story is lively, but not very tightly focused, and as before, a bit overwritten, as well as out of context. We'll have to pass, though, with thanks. So, gee, well, what does it mean that these two editors had such vastly different opinions of my story? It doesn't mean anything except that one of them said yes. And once you feel sure about what kind of story you write, you should not waste your time or your energy trying to figure out why some editors say no. That's just a waste of your creative juices to spend a lot of time thinking about that. So let me show you just briefly how my stick-to-itiveness about getting published in this magazine called the Southern Review kind of helped. It's the reason that I am your professor today. So this is a little like a subscription, a call for subscriptions from the Southern Review. When we first published them, they were brand new voices. Eudora Welty, Mary McCarthy, Ann Tyler, John Berryman, Nelson Algren. Hell yeah, this is the company that I want to keep, or I saw myself wanting to be in as a writer, as a younger woman. And so I was like, yeah, this is a magazine that I really want to get in if this is if I want to be the kind of writer that I want to be. Now, I didn't think about it in these terms. This is something from last week's talk on book publishing that I didn't get a chance to talk about very much, but it has to do with capital. It has to do with how much of a good bet is it to publish with a particular book publisher or a particular magazine story, a particular journal. So obviously, you want a magazine that has some economic capital behind it, whether it comes out in print or whether it comes out online. Even an online magazine needs capital. You need to have, you need to be able to buy the domain name and be able to pay for the magazine to continue to be online. You need to pay for web hosting for however long you want this magazine to be available. And so that's why it's really important if you decide that you want to be a publisher and you want to have a role to play in putting good work out into the universe, it's really great to have that feeling. But if one lost job or one bad week waiting tables caused you to not be able to afford something, then that's not a great place. And you owe it to the people whose work that you want to publish, that it be available not just that day or that week or that year, but for 20 years. You want people to be able to link out to this magazine forever. And so you have to think about that, like how much capital does a magazine have, not just in terms of money, that's a tangible thing, but human capital. Who are the people working there? How smart are they? What are their credentials? What are their skills? How much intellectual capital do they have? Social capital, for example, is it a magazine that other people recognize in terms of its symbolic value? Oh yeah, the Southern Review, that's a good magazine. Or is it a magazine that editors and agents pay attention to so that they can scout out new writers? And if a magazine doesn't have some of those things, and then it may not necessarily be worth your time. Okay, so that's important to, I think, to think about. And the Southern Review to me had those things, although I certainly at age whatever I was, I would not have thought about it in those terms. So this is my story with the Southern Review. It's another example of a magazine that from 1994 to 2000, when they finally took one of my stories, that's 6 years. I sent them 9 stories over that time period, and then finally on the 10th try they accepted it. And so this is their form rejection. And I was getting these, thanks for letting us have another look at this very appealing story, MG. But, you know, did I actually look to see who MG was? No, I did not. And also there was no internet at the time, so I couldn't really Google it. But did I try to figure it out? No, because I was young and I was stupid. But eventually, MG actually signed the notes with Michael Griffith and said he was the associate editor. And so finally, I'm starting to grasp that this story is making it to the editor's desk, and the editor's name is Dave Olney, but he's not going for it. The associate editor is named Michael Griffith, and he likes my work. So I wrote his name down on my little Southern Review card and was sending my stuff to him. And please note that even though he keeps saying, we like this, but no, he's not telling me what is right for the Southern Review, because it's not his job to tell me. And he's signing, he's all best. I'm thinking, okay, this is great. And then finally on March 17th, and I know it was March 17th because it was St. Patrick's Day and I was making corned beef and cabbage in my kitchen when the phone rang, and it was Michael. And a month earlier, I had sent him a story called Wallace Porter. And he said, I've been waiting for years for you to write a story like this. Thank you for sending it. And I cried. But what I didn't realize until later, I met him at a conference a couple of years later. And what he confessed to me was that he loved my stuff, but he couldn't get the editor, the Peter Stitt, the Dave Olney, to accept it. And so Dave Olney went on sabbatical and put Michael in charge of the magazine. And I'm just so fortunate that I happened to send a story during that semester that he was in charge so that he could publish my stuff, because I don't think Dave Olney ever would have. And it's because I did that the next thing happened, which is, I didn't give up after 9 tries, and I kept going to the 10th try. And this is my then agent. This is how he found me. Okay. Does anybody have a success story about finding somebody in a literary magazine? And he's like, yes, I read a great short story in the Southern Review a few years ago, and I called the writer and eventually sold the novel and stories to Ann Patty at Harcourt, who's great and who unfortunately is no longer at Harcourt. It was called The Circus in Winter by Kathy Day. It's funny because I originally looked at the story because I liked the author's last name. I don't know if that means I'm superficial, but at the time I was interested in writers whose last names were words. I think he means nouns, and her name was Day. So, and someone says, so this was a phase you went through? It was. I also went through a phase of looking for names with alliteration. For example, I represent a guy named Brad Barkley. Now, when this came out in Poets and Writers, a lot of writers were really mad and saying that I had some sort of unfair advantage in the fact that my family name is Day. And what are they supposed to do? Because their family names are not nouns. And what I wanted to say, although I kept quiet, was that they didn't see that the dumb reason that he paid attention to my story. The point is that my story was in there, and it took 6 years and 9 tries and a lot of work to actually be in the issue that he happened to be reading. Yes, there was luck involved in the fact that what my last name is, but it wasn't just luck that got me published and got me an agent and whatnot. It was also the fact that I had spent all of that. I'd worked really hard to get into that so that luck could happen. And that's an important thing for all of you to remember as well. The thing is that I thought that publishing in a magazine, I thought that meant that I was a writer. And certainly it meant a lot to me the first time I saw one of my stories in a magazine, but that's not really what it means to be a writer. I thought that publishing a book meant that I was a writer, but that's not true either. Convincing yourself each day to keep writing, this means that you are a writer, because the world will be sure to declare you matter, but you don't. Wow, your work's really exciting, but yeah, yours is really old-fashioned and dull. What do you do when someone says, you're okay, I guess? Do you stop or do you keep going? And that's the moment when you know whether or not you're really a writer. So the important thing to remember here is that no matter what, it's just important to always be sending out your work. So let me stop sharing and come out of here and see. Ooh, new share. Oh, wait, sorry, I'm hitting the wrong button. There we go. Does anybody want to ask any questions about the stuff that I've shown you here? Does anybody have any questions? I see some things in the chat. Is there anything I need to know about, Jim, that's in there?
Most of the chat comments were kind of just Matt vibing along with what was being said. So thank you, Matt, for that. The little encouragement.
It's okay that those people that I'm telling you you've never heard of, it's okay, because like when you guys do, like I've read today, my students in my class were talking about some of their favorite books, and like the world of publishing is so vast that your job is not to know everything. Your job at a certain point is to know your like corner of the market. Like that's sort of, those are your peeps. And so it's okay with me if you've never heard of Dan Shawn or Michael Griffith or anybody. So Samuel asked, regarding the name bit, do you have anything to say about using pen names? That's a good question. I would say that if you want to, it's better to use your own name, because we live in a world where it's incredibly hard to be anonymous. just super hard to be anonymous. Somebody asked me the other day if you wanted to publish nonfiction and use a pen name, if that was something that was a good idea. And my own feeling is that the whole point of nonfiction is the one genre that is against shame, and it's important for something to be nonfiction to be able to say, this is me and this is something that happened, or something that is true. So that's my own feeling about it, but I'm sure that there might be other nonfiction writers who feel differently. So I think that the idea of using a pen name, is there anybody that can think of a writer that you like who has a pen name? Oh, I know a good example of somebody uses a pen name for all kinds. This is a really good reason. Juliana Baggett is a woman about my age. She was a literary fiction writer, and then she started writing. She has a pen name for when she writes romances, and she has a pen name for when she writes YA and middle grade, and she has a pen name for when she writes various other, because it just got too confusing to people that she was writing in all these different genres, and so she created pen names for the different genres. So Samuel says, my favorite writer uses Wildbow, but he does not write nonfiction. And then yes, Lemony Snicket. I don't know, who is Lemony Snicket? Do we not know who that is? Oh, and Kylie says Daniel Handler. Oh, so that's who? Oh, okay, I got it. All right. Shout out to Judy Blume for writing erotica and children's book under the same name. Yes, exactly. But that's Judy Blume, and she's a freaking rock star. So of course she's going to do it like that. So I can't really tell you. I mean, I can't imagine using a pen name unless there was something, well, like let's say I wanted to write a tell-all book about Ball State and about like a behind the scenes, novel of intrigue, academic intrigue, but I didn't want people to know it was me. So because I didn't want to lose my job, that might be a good reason why I wanted to do it. J.K. Rowling used to use one. Yeah. So I mean, I'm happy. I think everybody's reason for maybe using a pen name might be different. And it's really, if anybody's thinking about that, please come talk to me, because I think everybody's reasons might be unique, and it just really depends. Are there any other questions? Make sure that you fill out that thing, and then remember that at make sure you fill out the survey that's at the bottom of the takeaways document, and then make sure that you stick around. I'm going to hit stop recording here in a minute, and make sure you stick around if you want to laugh at people, because laughing at people is always really fun when we're having a winter snowstorm. The other thing I'm going to say that's really important is that our next Writers at Work on self-publishing is not next Wednesday, but on Monday. So and it's because Katie Rank Love couldn't do Wednesday. So it's the one event that's on a Monday. So Monday, don't forget, we'll be here to talk about self-publishing. And self-publishing is another route to getting your work out there. That is really catching on. And this is not about poo-pooing it, just so you know. I'm not going to poo-poo the whole thing. She's my student. I'm proud of her. She's making more money self-publishing her books than she was in her day job. So now she just writes, and I'm very, very proud of her. And then the next week, we'll go back to Wednesday, and that will be how to get an agent and how to develop an audience by Sarah Hollowell, Ball State English alum, who just published a YA fantasy novel called A Dark and Starless Forest, and Angela Jackson Brown, who some of you may have had in class, who just published a novel. And they're going to be talking about those subjects. I hope you enjoyed tonight. I've been giving this talk about submitting to literary magazines for a while, and you can tell I get really passionate about it when I do it. So I hope you got a lot out of it.